Welcome to Epic Restorationz. Today, we're replacing the front motor mount on the Lady in Red, Georgia's 1930 Ford Model A.
So today's problem is we've noticed on the Lady in Red that the front of the engine is too low. When we try to use the crank or the engine, it does not line up with the pulley. The crank is higher than the pulley on the engine, and so we couldn't use it if we wanted to. So another thing I noticed is there's not enough room between the pulley and the cross member to get the fan belt off that lower pulley. So we've got something going on, so we got a new front motor mount, springs, all of that. For some reason this one is sagging. So we're gonna get started. I don't know if you can see it or not, but those springs on the sides, they just hold the engine from going right to left. It's gonna toggle. It sits on the Y, and there's the spring right there. And those side springs are just about collapsed right down. It shouldn't go that low. So there's something not right with this motor mount, or the spring that the motor mount sits on. There is a flat spring. Maybe be able to see it there in the picture just a little bit, that the coil spring is sitting on, but that may have collapsed. There's also supposed to be about 1/8 of an inch thick leather washer that's supposed to go there. All that adds up. So what we're gonna have to do is, we're draining the radiator right now because I'm gonna loosen the hoses. We're gonna pick the motor up on the front underneath and relieve some pressure there and try to get this off.
To get the existing front motor mount off of the car, we're going to need to jack up the engine a bit. Because we're going to be doing this, it's important that we disconnect any connected parts that could be strained or damaged by the process. We'll need to loosen up our radiator hoses, so we began by draining our antifreeze. To do this, simply place a bucket under the splash pans and open up the petcock to let it drain. Once the antifreeze was drained, we loosened and pulled off the radiator hoses that attached to the engine block.
There it goes.
If you have a heater attached to your car, it is best to loosen this up and remove it, so that it isn't forced up into the firewall when you raise up the engine. We continued by loosening the rear motor mounts and loosened the exhaust pipe just a bit as well. To get started with the motor mount, we raised up the car on the lift and began to examine the lower bushing and spring.
Yeah, that's loose. There should be a brass washer right there, and it's not there. Although I heard some people didn't use them, but the idea was it gave it a channel for this base to go through. So what I need to do is pull that cotter P and loosen this up first. It's all gooey and oily and greasy. It's got some kind of a washer there, but it's not the washer it's supposed to. Now, I need to raise it up somehow.
To raise up the engine, we placed a few boards on our jack and began to slowly lift up the engine underneath the pan. You only need to lift the front of the engine slightly, so only a few inches of lift is needed. Once the engine was raised up enough for us to properly insert the crank, we pulled it back out and then began loosening the front motor mount bolts using a 3/4 inch socket and ratchet.
Yep, it's loose. Let me do the other side now. It's this one right here. Can you see okay around me? Mm-hmm.
Removing the mounting bolts loosens the motor mount yoke from the front of the engine.
That one was the Timbuktu. You know, I think I'll probably get that belt off. Yeah, see, it's up high enough. I couldn't even get the belt off. Oh yeah, the whole thing is loose. Okay. Feels nice and tight though.
They sure are long, aren't they?
Well, it may be under tension. That's what I'm being a little careful now. Not really. Oh, I gotta pull the pulley off.
To loosen the pulley, you will need to remove the ratchet nut. This is the nut that holds the pulley onto the crankshaft and what the crankshaft fits into to turn the motor. To do this, you will need a special ratchet nut wrench. This 1 3/8 inch wrench allows you to remove the old ratchet nut without removing the radiator.
I finally got that motor mount out, but jacking the engine up wasn't enough. If you notice, I have the pulley slid forward. Now, it's hitting on the U-bolts to the spring mount, and I can't take it off, but it was enough for me to swivel that front motor mount out of there. Okay, so we're back over the workbench, and I've got the old motor mount here and our brand new one. And we can just kind of take a look. These springs have really crushed down. This plate is a spring in its own right, a spring steel. Same way with, the new one. But notice the new one came with a a leather washer here. That's probably 3/16 thick or so. And there wasn't anything on this side, although it looked like they put some gasket material under it, but it certainly wasn't even half as thick as that, which might be part of my problem. Because my front of the engine was sitting too low into the frame. In fact, it was low enough where I couldn't take the belt off that lower pulley. And so the thing that we first noticed was I couldn't put my hand crank in. The crank rod was higher than the hole in the inside that front pulley area where the ratcheting nut is, or bolt. And so we knew it was too low. So in just studying this, and this could be original, I suppose, these look like they're crushed down. These are a little heavier duty springs by the looks. Now, most of the weight's going to sit right here. This gives a little bit of spring to the engine going up and down. The frame goes right between here. And then you're going to put the spring on. And then there's a brass centering washer the inner hole will match up to the hole size in the frame, and the outer just kind of slips on it. That's going to help keep that hole from wearing. Also, the bolt part here from wearing, because if we look at this one, I'm going to back it up. Look at the wear down in there. And so this should help on that. Also, they just had a plain old washer, and the castle nut and the spring down here again is much smaller or shorter. Again, that wasn't by crush. That spring underneath here wasn't even under any tension. I could slide it up and down when it was on the frame. So tilting that pulley out just far enough gave me enough room to swivel this whole yoke to get that bolt out through that hole, which is fabulous. Now, another thing I noticed is this one, I'll get it so you can see it, has kind of a groove there. And I watched another YouTube video where the gentleman noticed on his new one, his pulley was rubbing it, but he really pointed out that the bolt goes into the casting here. This bolt goes into this casting and is welded right there. There's a little bit of a hole. Almost don't see it here. And in his case, there was a bead of weld that came up, and that was what was really getting in the way. I went ahead and decided I would grind mine smoother. Mine didn't have a huge bead, but it did have some. And I measured the thickness with my calipers here, inside that groove, and here. And I've got this, like 100 thousandths less than what this is. It's not much, but it was quite a bit more. So now I've ground that. So hopefully I'm avoiding having my pulley rub there. But it's one thing I'm going to double check, that the pulley does not rub here. So I'm going to have to put this back on, kind of tilt this all in. This will rain off. I got to try and keep all this together. I probably won't even try to put these springs in until I get this whole thing sitting in there and lined up, okay? Then I'm going to have to lower the engine down to the point, because otherwise right now it would probably be sitting like this, and I wouldn't be able to get these springs to stay put. Now the springs go into, and notice there's a little knob right there that's going to hold the bottom of the spring. And notice that on the whole mechanism, this is further forward of the engine than these mounts. Same thing with this. This hole is further forward away from the engine. These are closer. So you have to get this matched up. Otherwise, they wouldn't line up at all. All right. So all I got to do is probably just reach in there with this much, get this much in the hole, get these bolts on, lower it down just enough where I can then tweak these into that little, let me see if I can get up close enough so you can see it. Yeah, there's just a little deal there that the spring will go onto, and then also that knob, that D-dent that's stuck out there to hold that bottom. If I get it just the right height, I should be able to put that in by hand. They say it's nice to have two people, one person lowering the jack real slow while the other person's trying to get these springs in. But I'm going to attempt it. Chris is tied up with his son's 5th birthday party today. Well, okay, I got it in there, and I pushed the pulley back. I had to make sure I pulled that pulley forward, and then when I went back, I had to rotate it until the keyway fit in, because it wasn't going all the way back till I did that. So now that's in there, and it lines up really well with all the other pulleys, so I think I'm good there. So now I can take the nut that I took out, which is there's your ratchet nut. It's really a bolt, not a nut. And here's a special tool. 1 3/8. You can see how it's angled, so we can get it into that pulley and tighten this bolt down. So I'll go ahead and try and get this started. Started. Now I'm just gonna finger tighten it for the moment, just in case I set this all down, I gotta redo it. I've also just I snugged these, just snug. I'm gonna tighten them real tight once everything's down. There's no play there. They're snug enough to be tight, but they're not as tight as I'd like to torque them. And I thought while I'm getting everything to come together, I'll kind of hold off on it. Just gonna get a better shot. There, you can see that leather washer. You see that spring plate. I let that down, and then I gotta see if my crank will fit just fine. So we can give it a try.
After positioning the passenger side suspension spring in place, George lowered the engine down just a bit, about an inch, and was able to get that spring to sit between the dimple on the bottom side and the knob on the top. With the first spring in place, George then carefully positioned the other spring on the driver's side and then finished lowering the engine back down on top of it.
Okay, I'm underneath the car now. I haven't let it down any further. Remember, those springs are just holding, but I wanted to show how this goes on there. It should fit right up in that hole, and it does. Everything lines up nice. Wow. Not enough for my spring just yet. So I'll go ahead and lower this down a little further. All right, so I let the engine the rest of the way down. And I went ahead and put the brass bushing on there, the spring, and my castle nut, and I'm just gonna finger tighten it here a little bit. Now I'll go up above and start checking everything, and then I gotta remember to go around and tighten everything, because I loosened up the rear motor mount so that things would move. Even the exhaust pipe is loose. It's not taken off, but just loose enough so that I didn't have to fight it when I was trying to jack the engine up. So here we go. Okay, so now the engine is sitting on the springs and everything. You can kind of see it down in there. But what's most important is I took the hand crank and put it in the hole, and guess what lines up now? So ta-da! It's fixed, but now I gotta go through and get the belt back on, tighten up the alternator, tighten up the rear motor mounts, snug up that bottom mount on the front, and I gotta remember what else. Oh, I took off the heater and the heater duct as it went into the cab. I'll just carefully go, I gotta put the belt back on and just double check everything, make sure everything is still movable and so forth.
With the new front motor mount in place and the crank fitting correctly, all that's left to do is to reattach and retighten everything that we loosened up.
If you guys are enjoying our videos, or you found them helpful to you in some way, please give this video a thumbs up and subscribe to our channel.
And join us next time as we bring you more tips and information on how to maintain and enjoy your Ford Model A on the next Car and Driver episode of Epic Restorationz.